Today, I am going to tell you 3 terrifying true stories that prove just how quickly a beautiful adventure can turn into an absolute nightmare. Sit back, turn off the lights, and listen closely. Asterisk. Story 1. The Mountain's Toll. Our first story takes us to the morning of October 21st, 1990. A 30-year-old bank manager named Lee Hun Shou, along with 3 of his closest friends, began an ambitious ascent up Bilu Mountain in northern Taiwan. Bilu Mountain was notorious. It was considered a rite of passage for hikers. A grueling 8-hour round trip across punishing, jagged terrain. Because of its legendary status, it was usually crawling, with tourists and seasoned climbers alike. But on this specific, beautiful weekend morning, the mountain was entirely empty. By the time the group had been hiking for several hours, Lee's legs were burning. Every step felt like he was dragging lead weights. Yet, they pushed on, eventually arriving at a breathtaking rocky ridge to catch their breath. The weather was pristine, the sky a brilliant blue. Yet the isolation was incredibly eerie. There was no good reason for them to be the only souls on this mountain. But they brushed off the unsettling silence and continued upward. Eventually, they reached a famous section of the trail, a near vertical cliff face, where hikers had to pull themselves up, using a thick, anchored rope. It was a rugged, thrilling challenge. Wanting to document the moment, each man took his turn clinging to the rope, pausing halfway up to smile for the camera before hauling himself to the summit. When they finally reached the peak, the strange isolation hit them again. They had conquered one of Taiwan's most famous peaks. And they were completely alone. Aware that they were racing against the dying light of the sun, they snapped a few photos, drank some water, and began their descent. This is where things took a dark turn. On the way down, the exhaustion fully consumed Lee. He was dragging so far behind his friends that he finally waved them off, telling them to go ahead. "I know the way," he yelled ahead. "I'll meet you at the car." His friends agreed and pushed forward, moving at a rapid pace. But after a couple of hours, guilt set in. They decided to stop on the trail, sit in the eerily quiet woods, and wait for Lee to catch up. They waited and waited, but the trail remained totally empty. Growing anxious as the shadows lengthened, one of the friends volunteered to hike back up and find him. He trekked upward for over an hour, calling Lee's name into the silent trees. Nothing. With darkness rapidly falling, the friend assumed Lee must have accidentally taken a branching path and somehow beaten them to the bottom. He turned around, met up with the group, and they hurried to the parking lot. But Lee's car was empty. Lee was gone. The friends immediately rushed to the nearest police station. For the next week, massive search parties scoured every inch of Bilu Mountain. They found absolutely no trace of the 30-year-old hiker. The mountain had swallowed him whole. After 7 days, the search was called off, leaving Lee's family in a suffocating purgatory of unanswered questions. 4 agonizing months passed. Then, a group of hikers wandering off the beaten path stumbled upon a horrifying sight. It was Lee. His body was found sitting upright, his back leaning peacefully against the stone of the mountain. His backpack was resting right next to him. But the discovery only birthed more terrifying questions. The autopsy revealed no cause of death. He hadn't fallen. He hadn't been attacked by an animal. He hadn't starved. His bag was still full of survival gear, a flashlight, a compass, and food. It was as if Lee had simply sat down on the dirt and willed himself to die. But the true horror of this story wasn't revealed until a few days later, when one of Lee's friends finally got around to developing the film from the camera they had used on that doomed hike. He flipped through the photos of the summit, the scenery, and finally, the pictures of the men climbing the steep rope. But when he looked at the photo of Lee clinging to the rope, his blood ran completely cold. There, standing at the very top of the ridge, looking directly down at Lee, was a pale young girl wearing a bright red jacket. The men swore on their lives that they had not seen a single person on that mountain all day, let alone a little girl standing at the edge of a treacherous cliff. Locals immediately pointed to a dark, ancient myth surrounding Bilu Mountain, a legend of malicious mountain spirits that manifest as humans, targeting isolated hikers, leading them off the trail, and draining the life from them. Looking at the photo of the ghostly girl in red staring down at a doomed man, it becomes horrifyingly clear that Lee Hunsho didn't just get lost. He was hunted. Story 2. The Jungle's Madness. Our second story takes us deep into the unforgiving heart of the Amazon rainforest in Peru. It was the morning of August 8th, 2024. Inside a small, secluded wooden bungalow connected to a communal kitchen, a 48-year-old Russian woman named Ludmila Lazarenko sat with her legs crossed on the floor. Her eyes were closed. She was trying to meditate. Ludmila was a wife and a mother of two who lived a chaotic, busy life back home. She had come to this remote jungle retreat to find peace, to disconnect from the modern world, and to heal. In the adjoining kitchen was her friend, a 38-year-old Ukrainian man named Ivan Kuzmin. The two had met at similar spiritual retreats over the past 2 years and had formed a close, platonic bond over their shared desire for spiritual awakening. But these retreats weren't just about sitting in nature. The main draw was ayahuasca, a deeply powerful, ancient, hallucinogenic tea brewed from Amazonian vines. Devotees claim that a successful ayahuasca trip can cure deep-rooted trauma, allowing you to view your soul from the outside in. However, the director of this Peruvian retreat had one absolute, non-negotiable rule. You never, under any circumstances, drink the ayahuasca without a trained shaman present. The hallucinogen is incredibly volatile. If your mind goes to a dark place, you can experience a waking nightmare, entirely unable to distinguish terrifying hallucinations from reality. The shaman is there to anchor you, to protect you from yourself. But on this fateful morning, Ludmila and Ivan grew arrogant. They felt they were experienced enough to handle it on their own. While the rest of the camp was away doing a group meditation, Ivan boiled the water, brewed the forbidden tea, and poured 2 mugs. He handed one to Ludmila. They drank the bitter liquid, lay back on the wooden floor of the bungalow, and closed their eyes. A couple of hours later, the director of the retreat was leading a peaceful meditation session deep in the jungle when a blood-curdling scream echoed through the canopy. The sound was primal, filled with sheer, unadulterated terror. The director leaped to his feet and sprinted toward the bungalows. When he arrived, he found one of his staff members hyperventilating, pointing a trembling finger into the open door of Ivan and Ludmila's room. The director stepped forward and looked inside. The sight that greeted him was straight out of a horror film. The two friends had broken the golden rule, and the jungle had exacted a gruesome toll, while Ludmila had slipped into a peaceful trance. Ivan's mind had fractured into 1,000 jagged pieces. The ayahuasca had plunged him into a violent, psychotic nightmare. In his hallucination, he believed that Ludmila was no longer human. He thought she had been possessed by a demonic entity, and the only way to save her soul was to destroy her body. Still heavily under the influence of the drug, Ivan had grabbed a heavy metal water bottle and beaten Ludmila savagely. But he didn't stop there. He had wandered into the communal kitchen, retrieved a large chef's knife, and returned to the bungalow. When the director looked inside the room, he saw Ivan sitting on the floor, covered in crimson. He was looking up at the doorway, a wide, vacant, insane smile plastered across his face. Surrounding him, scattered across the floorboards of the bungalow, were the dismembered pieces of his friend. Ivan Kuzmin was arrested the moment he came down from his high. When the drug's hum wore off, and he realized what he had done to his friend, his reality shattered all over again. He is currently serving time in a Peruvian prison, a permanent resident of the hell he created. Asterisk. Story 3. The Invisible Crosshairs. Our final story proves that sometimes nature gives you a warning before it strikes, but only if you know what you're looking at. It was 4 p.m. on August 20th, 1975. An 18-year-old boy named Michael McQuillan was scaling the massive granite dome of Morro Rock in California's Sequoia National Park. Michael was a seasoned outdoorsman who had just completed a grueling 200-mile solo hike through the Sierra Nevadas. But today, he wasn't alone. Trailing behind him were his 12-year-old brother Sean and his 15-year-old sister Mary. The hike to the summit of Morro Rock is incredibly short, only a quarter of a mile. But it is essentially a steep, exposed staircase carved directly into the side of the stone. Knowing his younger siblings were struggling, Michael paused near the top to let them catch up. As he stood on the exposed granite, Michael noticed something unsettling. The temperature suddenly dropped, and the sky above them began to turn a bruised, sickly purple. He had checked the weather, and there wasn't supposed to be a storm, but the atmosphere felt heavy, almost vibrating with an unseen energy. When Sean and Mary finally reached the summit, the view was spectacular, but the sky had turned pitch black. The wind was whipping around them, and an eerie, static-like tension filled the air. Before they scrambled back down to safety, they wanted a quick photo to prove they made it. Mary grabbed her camera and pointed it at her two brothers. As she looked through the viewfinder, she noticed something hilarious. Both Michael and Sean's hair was standing straight up in the air, defying gravity, like they had just rubbed balloons on their heads. The boys laughed, completely unaware of the macabre reality of their situation. Mary snapped the photo. They lowered the camera, turned to begin their descent, and suddenly, the entire world went blinding white. There was a deafening, bone-rattling asterisk. Crack asterisk that sounded like the sky itself had torn open. The next thing Michael knew, he was lying flat on his back against the hard stone. His ears were ringing violently, his vision swimming. As his senses slowly returned, he rolled over and looked to his right. His sister Mary was crumpled on the ground. Beside her was 12-year-old Sean. Sean was curled into a fetal position. And to Michael's sheer horror, thick gray smoke was pouring off his younger brother's back. They had just been struck by a direct bolt of lightning. Operating purely on adrenaline, Michael and Mary dragged themselves to their feet. They scooped up the smoking, unconscious body of their brother, hauled him down the jagged mountain path, threw him into their car, and sped down the twisting roads to the nearest hospital. By an absolute miracle, despite taking the catastrophic, superheated force of a lightning bolt directly to his body, 12-year-old Sean survived. He suffered severe burns, but all three siblings walked away with their lives. But the reason this story is legendary, the reason we are talking about it today, is because of the photograph Mary took just seconds before the strike. When you look at the image of Michael and Sean smiling with their hair standing on end, you aren't just looking at a funny vacation photo. You are looking at a horrifying scientific phenomenon. When you are in an exposed, elevated area during a storm, and your hair begins to stand up, it means the air around you has become incredibly electrically charged. It means you have effectively become the tallest conductor in the area. They didn't know it, but they weren't posing for a picture. They were standing directly in the crosshairs of nature's sniper rifle. Today, the National Park Service uses that exact photograph as a grim warning to hikers around the world. Asterisk. If you are on a mountain and your hair stands up, run for your life, because you are about to be struck by lightning. Nature is entirely unforgiving. Whether it's a ghostly presence in the mountains of Taiwan, the mind-shattering madness of the jungle, or a bolt of electricity from the sky, survival is never guaranteed. If you enjoyed these terrifying true stories, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the dark, the mysterious, and the macabre. Until next time, stay safe out there.